Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Today is episode 7 of the Cryptid Files, a series where we explore the creatures that lurk on the edges of folklore and fear. The woods are quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful. Not silent, just waiting. In the dead of winter, the forest in southern New Jersey doesn't look like much. No mountains, no cliffs, no drama. Just flat land, thin trees, and miles of nothing that all looks the same. That's what makes it dangerous. That's what makes it easy to disappear. This is the New Jersey Pine Barrens. Over 1 million acres of scrub pine, sand roads, and swallowed towns. A place where sound travels strangely, where distance lies, where you can walk for hours and feel like you've gone nowhere at all. People say the woods don't want you here. They don't chase you away. They just don't help you leave. For more than 300 years, something has been blamed for the unease people feel here. Something blamed for the screams at night, for the animals found torn apart, for the feeling deep in your chest that you're being watched by something that understands you're alone. They call it the Jersey Devil. Most people hear that name and think legend. A story told to scare children. A hoax born from boredom and bad newspapers. Something exaggerated over time. But legends don't always come with witnesses. They don't usually come with panic. They don't usually survive this long without changing. So here's the question we're asking tonight. What if the thing stalking these woods isn't a legend, but a lineage? What if it didn't appear suddenly, fully formed, out of fear or imagination? What if it was born here, screaming, unwanted, and never meant to survive, but did anyway? Because some stories don't begin with sightings. They begin with a birth no one wanted to remember. And some places don't forget. If you've never been there, it's hard to explain why this place feels wrong. The New Jersey Pine Barrens don't rise up to meet you. They don't loom or intimidate the way mountains do. They just spread. Mile after mile of low pines, shrub oak, and sand that shifts under your feet. The land is flat enough to trick your sense of direction. Every path looks like the last one. Every clearing feels familiar, until it doesn't. This is one of the largest remaining wilderness areas on the East Coast. Over 1 million acres. And yet, it's surrounded by some of the most densely populated places in the country. Highways, suburbs, cities, pressing in on all sides. And still, people vanish here. Not dramatically, not with witnesses. They just don't come back out. The soil here is poor, too acidic for most crops. That's why so many early settlements failed. Entire towns were built, struggled, and were abandoned. Paper mills, iron furnaces, villages that appear on old maps, and nowhere else. Their foundations still sit out there, swallowed by moss and sand, barely recognizable as human-made. Locals call them ghost towns, but that implies they're empty. They're not. They're just quiet. This land doesn't preserve things the way other places do. It doesn't mark history with monuments or plaques. It erases it. Roads fade, buildings collapse inward, names are forgotten. Even bodies, human or animal, don't last long here. The forest takes them apart, slowly and thoroughly, which makes it the perfect place for stories to grow unchecked. For centuries, people have reported getting turned around in these woods, compasses spinning, familiar landmarks suddenly gone. Locals will tell you, if you don't know the pines, they will confuse you. And if you panic, they will keep you. There are long-standing accounts of hunters finding camps they didn't recognize, of hikers hearing voices where no one should be, of people following sounds, crying or screaming, only to realize they've wandered miles off course. And then there are the disappearances. Some explained, some written off, some never officially recorded at all. Because this has always been a place where things slip through the cracks. Geographically and socially. A place for what no one wanted to see. A place for the unwanted, the exiled, and the forgotten. So when people say that pine barrens feel hostile, they don't mean violent. They mean indifferent. This isn't a landscape that welcomes outsiders. It doesn't guide you. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't care if you understand it. And if something wanted to stay hidden, to move without being seen, to scream without being found, to exist just out of the reach of proof, there are few places better suited for it than this. Because the pine barrens don't just hide things. They teach them how to disappear. The story doesn't begin in the woods. It begins in a house that was already too quiet. Colonial New Jersey, early 1700s. Sparse farms carved out of stubborn land. Families spread far apart. Neighbors close enough to watch, but not close enough to help. Life here was hard, isolating, and shaped by fear of both God and wilderness. The Leeds family lived on the edge of what little society there was. Outsiders, quarrelsome, poorly regarded. Some said they practiced strange beliefs. Others said they were simply unlucky. Either way, they were not embraced. At the center of it all was Mother Leeds. By the time she became pregnant again, she had already had more children than she could manage. Too many mouths, too much strain, another winter coming. And according to the story, the version passed down quietly, not proudly, she broke. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a sentence spoken in exhaustion and fear. This child will be the devil. There's no lightning in this part of the story. No warning. No sign that anything hurt her. Until the birth. The labor was normal. Painful, long, but ordinary. A midwife, family nearby, a healthy baby boy delivered into the world, crying like any other. For a moment, everything was fine. And then it wasn't. They say the infant changed in front of them. Bone stretching, skin tightening, fingers pulling back into hooves. A neck stretching like no neck should. Wings tearing through flesh that had just been new. The room filled with screaming, but not just from the baby. What emerged wasn't a child. It was wrong in ways no one had words for yet. Hooved feet struck the floor. Wings unfolded against the ceiling beams. And the sound it made? High, piercing, furious. Wasn't human. It was something raw and animal and furious at being alive. Before anyone could stop it, before anyone could even decide what they were seeing, it leapt. Up the chimney, into the dark, out into the woods. Gone. No body, no proof, just soot, feathers, and a house that would never feel clean again. That's the part people like to tell loudly. The monster, the transformation, the escape. What they don't linger on is what came after. A family marked. A woman blamed. A story no one wanted to report too clearly in case it repeated itself. Because curses aren't supposed to work. And children aren't supposed to survive being unwanted. But something did. And for generations after, whenever something screamed in the pines, whenever livestock turned up dead, whenever someone swore they saw wings where wings didn't belong, they didn't say it appeared. They said it came back. Not every legend starts with fear. Some start with a family trying to forget what they asked for. Ask 10 people what the Jersey Devil looks like, and you'll get 10 slightly different answers. But listen long enough, across decades, across centuries, and the differences begin to narrow. Witnesses describe a creature that doesn't quite belong to any one category. Not fully animal, not fully imagined. Something assembled out of the wrong parts. A horse-like head is mentioned again and again. Long-faced, angular, unfamiliar in a way that makes people hesitate before naming it. Some say it looks like a skull, thin. Others say it's muscular, heavy, too solid to dismiss. Bat-like wings, leathery, wide, and unmistakable once they unfold. Not feathers, not graceful, but functional. The kind of wings that sound heavy when they move. Hooves instead of feet. Hard impacts against frozen ground. Imprints found where no animal should leave them. A long neck, too long. The kind that shouldn't move the way it does. Witnesses often say that's the part they remember most. The way it turned its head without moving the rest of its body. And the eyes, red or glowing, or reflecting light in a way that doesn't match headlights or flashlights. Eyes that don't blink when they're noticed. Eyes that seem to look through people instead of at them. Then there's the sound. People don't agree on much, but they agree on this. The scream. Some describe it as high-pitched and piercing, like metal tearing under pressure. Others say it sounds like an infant crying, raw, desperate, and wrong coming from the woods in the middle of the night. A few swear it's mechanical, almost shrill, as if something is forcing air through a shape it was never meant to pass through. It's not a roar. It's not a growl. It's distress, or fury, or both. And it carries. Hunters have reported hearing it from miles away. Campers wake up knowing instantly that whatever made that sound was not a fox, not an owl, not anything they could name and go back to sleep beside. What makes these accounts unsettling isn't how dramatic they are. It's how similar they remain. Descriptions from the 1700s echo reports from the 1800s. Sightings in the early 1900s line up with the encounters in the late 20th century. People who've never read the same stories still mention the same features, the same movements, the same sounds. Different centuries, different backgrounds, same outline. Skeptics point out that memory is unreliable, and they're right. Stories influence stories. Fear fills in gaps. But consistency like this doesn't come from randomness alone. It comes from repetition. From something that looks the same, long enough to be recognized. Because if this were just imagination, the details would drift. If it were a hoax, it would evolve. If it were folklore alone, it would exaggerate itself into nonsense. Instead, it stays restrained, always just clear enough to terrify, never clear enough to capture. And that's the part that keeps people coming back to the question. If something has been described the same way for hundreds of years, what exactly are people seeing? For more than 2 centuries, the Jersey Devil belonged to the margins, to whispers, to the woods, to people who didn't expect to be believed. That changed in January of 1909. It started quietly, like these things usually do. A sighting here, footprints there, a report passed between neighbors, then written down, then printed. Within days, the stories were no longer isolated. They were everywhere. Across New Jersey, into Pennsylvania, across the river, into Delaware. People reported seeing a strange, winged creature moving across rooftops, darting between trees, gliding over frozen ground. Tracks were found in snow, hoof-like, spaced too far apart for any known animal. Some prints appeared to end abruptly, as if whatever made them had taken flight. The newspapers seized on it. Headlines warned of a flying devil. Illustrations exaggerated features already hard to explain. Every scream in the night became newsworthy. Every dead animal became evidence. Skeptical or not, editors understood one thing clearly. Fear sells. And fear spreads fast. Schools closed, not for weather, but for safety. Parents refused to let children walk home alone. Factories shut their doors early as workers insisted on leaving before dark. Men armed themselves in organized patrols, combing the woods with rifles and lanterns. This wasn't curiosity. This was full-blown panic. Police departments logged reports they couldn't explain. Farmers found livestock mutilated, drained, or scattered. A trolley car conductor claimed the creature attacked his vehicle. A woman fainted after encountering it on her porch. Hunters fired at something they said didn't fall. The sightings came from people with nothing to gain by lying. Workers, shopkeepers, even police officers. And they came in clusters, sometimes minutes apart, as if whatever was being seen was moving, traveling through communities. Then came the hunts. Posses marched into the Pine Barrens, confident that enough men with guns could solve the problem. They returned with nothing. No bodies, no blood trails, just stories about something moving too fast, shapes slipping between trees, and the feeling of being watched from above. A few claimed success. Dead animals were dragged into town and labeled the Jersey Devil. Kangaroos, dogs, deformed livestock. Each capture fell apart under scrutiny. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was already done. What makes 1909 different isn't that people believed, it's that too many people believed at the same time. Mass hysteria is the easy explanation, and it explains some of it. Fear is contagious. Stories stack. Imagination fills in the gaps. But hysteria doesn't usually leave footprints in the snow. It doesn't shut down cities. It doesn't send armed men into the woods, night after night, convinced they're being hunted back. This wasn't a legend being remembered. It was an event unfolding in real time. Documented, argued over, witnessed, and then quietly abandoned once it became too uncomfortable to explain. By February, the sightings tapered off. Life resumed. Newspapers moved on. But something had changed. After 1909, no one could say the Jersey Devil was just an old story. Too many people had seen something. Too many people had reacted as if it were real. From that point on, the devil didn't belong only to folklore. It belonged to history. If the Jersey Devil were only one colonial story, or a 1909 panic, it would have ended there. It didn't. In the late 20th century, reports began to surface again. Not in newspapers this time, but in police logs, personal accounts, and stories told reluctantly. People who preface their experience with, "I don't believe in this kind of thing," and then tell it anyway. Drivers described it first. A shape crossing the highway too quickly to stop for. Too tall to be a deer. Too wrong in its movements to be a bird. Headlights catch wings mid-stride. A long neck turning towards the car. Eyes reflecting red or white before vanishing into the trees. By the time brakes are hit, there's nothing there. No body, no impact, just the certainty that something crossed the road that shouldn't exist. Campers hear it differently. They don't always see anything at all. They hear screaming echo through the woods long after dark, high, thin, and sharp enough to cut through conversation. Some say it sounds like a woman. Others swear it's a child. A few describe it as metallic, like something grinding against itself. The sound moves, not closer, not further, just around. Campers report packs of dogs refusing to leave tents. Fires burning low as people sit awake, waiting for a noise that never quite comes close enough to confront. And then there are the hunters. People who know these woods. People who've been walking them for decades. People who do not scare easily. Some will hunt the edges of the New Jersey pine barrens, but refuse to go deep. Not because they've seen the Jersey Devil clearly, but because they haven't. They talk about the feeling of being tracked, of something pacing them just out of sight, of sound stopping the moment they turn, of sudden, complete silence where there should be birds, insects, anything. Many say the same thing. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't charge. It just watched. And that's the pattern that's never changed. The sightings are brief, the encounters incomplete, the evidence non-existent. No clear photographs, no bodies, no remains. Just impressions that linger longer than they should. People report the same aftermath. The feeling of being evaluated. Not hunted, not threatened, just noticed. As if something ancient and patient has learned that being seen for too long invites problems. So it doesn't linger. It crosses roads when it knows drivers can't stop. It screams where sounds carry, but bodies don't. It stays just beyond tree lines and firelight. Always fleeting, never caught, always watched. And that may be the most unsettling part. Because modern sightings don't suggest a creature struggling to survive. They suggest one that's adapted. There are explanations for the Jersey Devil. Reasonable ones. Necessary ones. And to understand why the legend persists, you have to look at them honestly, without rolling your eyes, and without reaching for fear too quickly. The most common explanation is misidentification. The Pine Barrens are home to animals that look and sound unsettling if you're not expecting them. Large birds with wide wingspans can appear monstrous at night, especially when caught in headlights. Owls produce screams that sound disturbingly human. Livestock, the horses, goats, and even exotic animals, have escaped enclosures over the years and wandered into places they don't belong. Add darkness, add distance, add panic, and suddenly a shape becomes something else entirely. There's also the role of hoaxes. especially during the early 20th century. Newspapers, well, they weren't above exaggeration. Sensational headlines sold copies. Sketches filled in details no one can confirm. Stories grew sharper edges as they were retold and reprinted. In 1909, fear became contagious. Once people expected to see something, they did. This is how mass hysteria works. And on paper, it explains a lot. But not everything. Because skepticism starts to strain when you look at what doesn't change. The sounds people describe don't line up clearly or cleanly with any known animal. Infant-like cries, mixed with metallic shrieks, don't match owls neatly. High, piercing screams, reported miles apart, carrying through dense forest, don't behave the way most wildlife calls do. And then there's the anatomy. Witnesses separated by hundreds of years, people with no access to the same books, illustrations, or media, describe the same improbable combination. Wings without feathers, hooves without a body that makes sense for them, a long neck that moves in ways people can't forget once they've seen it. If this were pure imagination, the details would blur. They don't. And hoaxes don't last 3 centuries without changing form. Finally, there's persistence. The New Jersey pine barrens have changed. Roads cut through them, towns expanded, technology advanced, cameras became universal, satellites map every mile, and still, reports continue. Not loudly, not constantly, just enough. Skepticism explains how people could be wrong. It explains why fear spreads. What it doesn't fully explain is why the story refuses to die quietly. Because most hoaxes burn out. Most misidentifications are correct. Most folklore evolves into something safer. This hasn't. The Jersey Devil remains oddly specific, oddly restricted, and oddly uninterested in proving himself. Which leaves one uncomfortable possibility: that skepticism may explain the edges of the story, but not whatever's been standing at the center of it all this time. At some point, fear becomes familiar. The Jersey Devil didn't disappear after 1909. It changed roles. Today, its image shows up on roadside signs, t-shirts, Halloween decorations, and sports logos. It's a mascot, a novelty, a story told with a smile instead of a warning, something people pose beside instead of avoid. Tourism leaned in, towns leaned in, New Jersey leaned in. Because once a legend becomes unavoidable, the only way to live with it is to own it. But that doesn't mean it's lost its meaning. Beneath the caricatures and souvenirs, the Jersey Devil still serves a purpose. It always has. It's a warning. Not about monsters, but about isolation. about what happens when people are pushed to the margins, when families are cut off, when desperation festers quietly until something breaks. It's a symbol of wilderness. And the New Jersey Pine Barrens aren't just trees. They're a reminder that not everything in the world is managed, mapped, or domesticated. That even in a small, crowded state, there are places that don't answer us. Places that don't care how advanced we think we are. And it's a reminder of consequences. In the oldest versions of the story, the devil isn't punished for being evil. It's punished for being unwanted. That distinction matters. Because the legend doesn't say, be afraid of monsters. It says, be careful what you cast out. So why does New Jersey keep this story alive? Because it fits. This is a state built on edges, on in-betweens, and being overlooked and underestimated. The Jersey Devil isn't a towering, world-ending creature. It doesn't attack cities or demand worship. It lives in the woods. It appears briefly. It refuses to explain itself. Just like the place that birthed it. By keeping the Jersey Devil close, on jerseys, on murals, and souvenirs, New Jersey controls the narrative. It turns fear into folklore. It turns the unknown into identity. But even now, the story never fully becomes a joke. Because every legend needs a little truth to survive. And the Jersey Devil endures, not because everyone believes, but because enough people aren't completely sure they shouldn't. By the end of every story like this, there's an expectation, a reveal, a verdict, a final answer that ties the legend into something manageable. The Jersey Devil doesn't offer that. Because maybe it was never meant to be understood as a single creature. Maybe it's not one body moving through time, but a shape the land keeps making. A story that forms whenever isolation, fear, and wilderness overlap. Something born once, and then reborn again and again, through place and memory. The New Jersey Pine Barrens don't behave like other landscapes. They don't preserve. They don't display. They absorb. Footprints don't linger here. Buildings sink. Names fade. Whatever passes through the pines is taken apart, slowly and quietly, until only impressions remain. And impressions are dangerous things, because they're easy to dismiss, easy to rationalize, easy to ignore, until enough of them stack up. So maybe the Jersey Devil isn't gone because it never needed to stay. It doesn't demand belief. It doesn't prove itself. It just reminds people, every so often, that there are places in this world that don't belong to us. Places where something can move unseen. Where stories don't resolve neatly, where being certain is a liability. People still walk in the Pine Barrens expecting nothing to happen. Most of the time, they're right. But sometimes, someone leaves with the feeling that they were noticed, that the woods paid attention, that something decided they weren't worth following any further. And maybe that's the point. Because some legends don't want belief, they just want their distance. That's the story of the Jersey Devil. If you've had an experience, something fleeting in the woods, a scream in the night, or eyes reflecting red where they shouldn't be, send it our way. You could submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous. And remember, these are not creatures that linger for attention. They move quickly. They watch quietly. If you hear wings where there shouldn't be any, don't foul. Leave. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.